You wave at the guy next door, mow your lawns at the same time. Maybe you even borrow his ladder once in a while. Then one day, a gunshot, a scream, a headline. Across quiet neighborhoods in the US, long-simmering tensions between neighbors are exploding into shocking acts of violence. These aren't spur-of-the-moment crimes. These are built on years of bitterness over property lines, noise complaints, dogs barking, and security cameras. What makes someone cross that line? What pushes a neighbor from passive aggression to a murder weapon? In this video, we're diving into 3 real stories of suburban horror where ordinary neighborhood disputes escalated into unthinkable bloodshed. Some ended in tragedy, others left survivors crawling through their own front lawns, begging to live. These are not just cautionary tales. They're evidence of something darker growing in quiet communities: distrust, isolation, and rage with no release valve. Let's begin with a father, a tree, and a bullet that pierced not just flesh, but trust in the very system meant to protect him. Davis Maturi, a 34-year-old father and immigrant from Kenya, lived in a quiet neighborhood where fences marked boundaries, but nothing could protect him from the man next door. He had worked hard to make a home here, to raise a family, to build something stable. But for over a year, Davis lived under threat. His neighbor John Herbert Sawchak had become increasingly hostile. He yelled racial slurs across the lawn, damaged Davis's fence, left disturbing notes, and followed his family. At night, the lights in Sawchak's window would flick on as if he were watching. Davis reported it again and again, 19 times. He told the police that the threats were escalating, that the man was armed, that he was afraid for his life. The department agreed he was dangerous. They even issued warrants, but they didn't act. Why? They said it was too risky. The suspect had mental health issues, he owned guns, and he forced entry could provoke violence. So they watched, waited, and hoped it wouldn't get worse. But it did. On October 23rd, Davis stepped outside to prune a tree at the edge of his yard. It was a tree that stood near the property line, harmless and ordinary. But to Sawchak, it was sacred, planted years ago with his late mother. What Davis didn't know was that Sawchak had been watching from an upstairs window, a rifle in hand. He fired once. A single crack shattered the morning air. The bullet tore into Davis's neck like a blade of fire, punching through flesh, splintering bone. It shattered 2 ribs on impact. Then it tunneled deeper, fracturing his spine with a sickening crunch. He didn't scream. He couldn't. The shot had crushed his windpipe. His knees gave out. He collapsed in a heap near the roots of the very tree he'd been pruning, eyes wide, mouth agape, fingers clawing at the earth as if trying to hold on to something, anything. Blood poured from his neck in pulsing waves, soaking the grass beneath him. Inside the house, his daughter saw it happen. She screamed, a raw animal sound of terror, but no one came. The man who pulled the trigger, he didn't run, he didn't call for help. He just walked back inside, closed the door, pulled the blinds, sat in the silence of what he had just done. And still, no arrest, no sirens, no rush of officers storming the house. Just a family watching a father bleed, just a neighborhood too quiet, just a system that waited. It took 5 more days, a full SWAT team, and a 5-hour standoff for the police to finally act. A negotiator begged him through a loudspeaker. Officers prepared to launch gas.
Subject, you are under arrest. Take it through the rear door now and follow the commands of officers.
Only then at 1:24 a.m. did Sawchak walk out of the back door and surrender. At a press conference just hours later, Police Chief Brian O'Hara stood behind a podium and admitted the truth. Yes, we failed this victim. He should not have been shot. The mayor tried to defend the delay. He said it was a delicate, dangerous situation, that the officers did it the right way. But to the Somali and Black immigrant communities in Minneapolis, it didn't feel right, because Davis wasn't a stranger to the system. He'd begged for help, documented every threat, asked the city to protect him from a man with weapons and a growing fixation. And yet, nothing happened until blood hit the ground. In court, Sawchak was charged with attempted murder, felony harassment, and racially aggravated assault. He'd turned a tree dispute into a hate crime. 1 bullet nearly destroyed an entire family. But the bigger question still stands. Why was this preventable act of violence allowed to unfold? What does it say about policing in America when danger is known, documented, and monitored, but still ignored? What does it mean when a mentally unstable white man with weapons is considered too dangerous to confront, but still allowed to stay free in a neighborhood full of families? Davis survived, barely, but his faith in the system did not. He will live with chronic pain, with trauma, with the knowledge that he did everything right and still wasn't protected. And his story is now part of a growing list of people who called for help, who followed protocol, who trusted the system, only to be told, not yet. Unfortunately, Davis wasn't the only victim of neighborhood violence. In Titusville, Florida, a petty dispute between neighbors had been escalating for months. But no one imagined it would end like this in a military-style ambush on Labor Day weekend 2012. The gunman was Willie Billy Woodward, a 44-year-old Iraq War veteran. In his mind, the block had become a battlefield, and in the early hours of September 3rd, he acted like it was. It started with a stolen birthday gift, a trivial thing. But that small act sparked something bitter. According to neighbors and police reports, tensions between Woodward and his next-door neighbors Gary Hembry and Timothy Bruce Blake had been growing for weeks. Accusations flew back and forth. Shouting matches erupted over driveways, property lines, and even pets. Woodward claimed that his family was being harassed. He alleged that the neighbors had threatened to kill him, rape his wife, and abuse his autistic daughter. He filed complaints, he installed cameras, but the legal system moved slowly. A court denied his request for a protection order. He felt trapped and furious. So he planned something unthinkable. That weekend, the Blake family invited friends over for a backyard barbecue. Among the guests were Gary Hembry and Roger Pisior, both Woodward's neighbors. As the group sat outside laughing and drinking, Woodward prepared for war. In court testimony later confirmed by police video, Woodward, dressed in camouflage, painted his face and crawled across his lawn with a pistol and extra magazines. "I was on a mission," he told investigators. "I was in a war zone." He believed his family was under imminent threat. He opened fire just after midnight. Roger Pisior, seated on a chair, was the first to fall. He died on the spot. Then Woodward turned to Bruce Blake, who was standing on the carport. 11 bullets tore through Blake's body. Somehow, he survived. Gary Hembry, trying to run back inside, was shot in the chest and collapsed at his doorway. Woodward returned to Pisior's body and shot him again in the head. "I wanted to make sure there were no survivors," he told detectives. His own home surveillance system caught the entire event, from the crawl to the final shot. He didn't flee. Instead, he walked home, handed his weapon to his wife, and waited. When police arrived, he surrendered without a struggle. In custody, Woodward claimed Florida's stand your ground law. He said he feared for his life, that he believed the men he shot were planning to kill him. But a judge rejected the defense. The attack, prosecutors argued, was premeditated. It was not self-defense. It was an execution. In 2018, a jury found Woodward guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of attempted first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But legal closure didn't end the trauma. Pisior had been visiting Hembry for a barbecue. He didn't even live on the street. Blake survived, but with life-altering injuries. The families of the victims described years of pain, PTSD, and loss. What makes this story so chilling is how domestic it all was. This wasn't a gang war or a drug raid. It was a middle-class neighborhood. Lawns, birthdays, backyards. And yet, beneath that suburban quiet, something festered. Rage, fear, and miscommunication paired with a justice system that moved too slowly. A man who believed he was defending his family and instead tore 3 apart. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning. It began like any other Sunday. On a quiet cul-de-sac in Berkeley Township, New Jersey, Tom Kwiatkowski climbed a ladder to fix something on the house. A few feet away, his wife Jill tended to their twin toddlers inside. Nothing about the morning was unusual, except for the man watching. His name was John Adamo. He lived next door, and for months, maybe years, he'd been spiraling. There were arguments, bitter ones, accusations of trespassing, police calls, cameras pointed at one another's doors, and a sign. A red no trespassing sign nailed to a fence. It didn't just warn strangers, it called out Tom by name. On March 10, 2025, the tension snapped. From somewhere near the fence line, Adamo raised a gun. He aimed it at Tom, unarmed, unguarded, and pulled the trigger. The shot ripped through the silence. Tom collapsed backward off the ladder, bleeding out in the driveway while his wife screamed from inside. But Adamo wasn't done. He turned, walked closer to the house, and fired again, this time through a glass door. The bullet tore into Jill's leg as she shielded her children. Wounded, she crawled to the phone and dialed 911. "Please get the cops here," she gasped. "I'm bleeding to death. I can't leave my kids. If I do, please tell them I love them." On the other end of the line, dispatchers tried to keep her calm, but Jill knew what she saw. Blood pooling around her. Her husband was motionless outside. Her children were crying, barely understanding what just happened. "I think he's dead," she whispered. "There's blood everywhere." Police arrived in minutes. Adamo had barricaded himself inside. For 2.5 hours, SWAT teams surrounded the home while bomb units dealt with something else they found, what looked like a pressure cooker device. Thankfully, it wasn't explosive, but the fear that it could have been, very real. Then, a final sound. A self-inflicted gunshot. Adamo was dead. He killed himself after trying to murder the couple next door, the couple he'd lived beside for years, the couple he watched, monitored, and eventually hunted. Tom and Jill were airlifted to Jersey Shore University Medical Center. Both survived, but barely. Their bodies fractured, their home shattered, their children left with scars no one could see. Neighbors came forward later. Some described Adamo as paranoid, obsessive, a man who believed he was being wronged at every turn. Others said they warned authorities, that there had been 6 police visits in just 1 year, that the signs were there. One neighbor told reporters, "We all knew something was going to happen. We just didn't know when." And still, no one stopped it. A home isn't supposed to be a war zone. A fence isn't supposed to be a fault line. But on Neptune Drive, something as simple as a property line became a death sentence. Not because of a stranger, not a burglar, not a mass shooter with no ties, but a man next door. A man who smiled at your mailbox, who shoveled snow the same winter, who fed paranoia so long that it turned into gunfire. And once again, a family was left picking up the pieces, knowing it could have been stopped. Because sometimes the danger isn't out there, it's right beside you. These aren't just isolated tragedies. They're part of a pattern where something as simple as pruning a tree, parking in the wrong spot, or asking a neighbor to turn the music down can spiral into bloodshed. Where simmering tensions, unchecked biases, and fragile egos collide in deadly ways. In each case, the victims weren't at war. They were home, with families, with routines, just trying to live. But the danger didn't come from a stranger on the street. It lived next door. Whether it's Minneapolis, Titusville, or a quiet cul-de-sac in New Jersey, the question we're left with isn't just how, but why does this keep happening? What fractures in our social fabric allow violence to fester in familiar places? Why are warning signs dismissed until gunfire makes headlines? There is no single answer, but every time we stay silent, the next bullet loads itself. We owe it to Davis, to the Hay family, to every child, partner, and parent left behind, to confront the culture of escalating aggression, the failures of intervention, and the weaponization of everyday disputes. Because if home isn't safe, where is? And if we can't trust our neighbors, what kind of country are we really building? This isn't about one town, it's about all of us. And if this story stayed with you, let it travel further. There's power in remembering. There's responsibility in retelling. Let it echo.